To Mark Voyger, who's a senior fellow with the Center for European Policy Analyst, also director of the Master's Program in Global Management at American University Kyiv. Mark, thank you for your time. The EU had estimated that over the Northern Hemisphere summer, so May, June, July, August, the Ukrainians were firing about 4,000 to 7,000 artillery shells a day. Russia was firing back 20,000 a day. Can Ukraine really win this war?
Of course, the victory of Ukraine in this war is also linked to the availability of weapons, of ammunition, as you correctly pointed out. Now, of course, Ukraine is experiencing difficulties given the major discrepancy of almost 4-1, because Russia, has in its disposal stockpiles from Soviet times, but also it has been given ammunition from North Korea and others. This is, Soviet-style ammunition. So the European Union and the US must act hand in hand in a very decisive fashion to actually respond to this critical need for ammunition by Ukraine. Nobody, I repeat, nobody over the course of the last 30 years, during the so-called peace dividend and post-Cold War era, ever thought that there would be a war on this planet that would require the millions of shells, thousands, tens of thousands of shells every day. So the Western militaries, including the U.S. military, was not prepared to supply, even to store such huge amounts of ammo. Therefore, the production facilities, both on the European continent and in the US, must step up their production. There are countries that actually have such facilities from Soviet times, for example, Bulgaria, where there have been working 3 shifts for the last year or two already to supply, the simplest of all types of ammo, the Soviet type, shells and other less sophisticated but equally important supplies. Now, this is easier said than done because the focus over the last couple of decades has been on high-precision weapon systems. Obviously, they're longer range, they're much more expensive. So the ability to manufacture those, of course, it cannot be done in a shorter period. But it requires longer-term planning. We're not back in the Second World War where you could convert a simple factory to turn out helmets and simple ammo. This is a different era, but still creative solutions must be executed. And of course, funding has to be approved, as we saw today with the case of the European Union, and hopefully the US will also unblock, the US Congress will go ahead and approve the $65+ billion due this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will depend on Republicans getting what they want in terms of border security in the United States. Mark, this is a very perverse way of looking at this subject, but bear with me. Do you think it's possible that NATO, rather than the EU, because militarily, NATO would actually not like a resolution to the war between Russia and Ukraine too quickly? Because quite clearly, NATO is frightened about the fact that it lacks preparedness for further Russian aggression beyond Ukraine. We've heard all the talk over the past 12 months. It's becoming more and more intense. That NATO, where it thought it might have 10 years to prepare for such Russian aggression, now thinks it possibly has 2, maximum 3. So therefore, the longer the Russian war machine expends itself in Ukraine, means that the Kremlin is not as much of an immediate threat to NATO right now. Is that possible?
Well, what you're saying is it possible that the NATO countries are simply, counting on Ukraine buying time for NATO to prepare? I haven't seen official statements, that indicate that NATO is interested in having the war continue. Of course, everybody recognizes that Ukraine is buying time by default because of this, of what you said, of grinding down the Russian war machine. But look, the war has its own logic. There's the fog of war, as you know from Clausewitz. The war escalates and can escalate any minute in terms of the Ukrainians. The Russians continue to strike against targets in Ukraine, potentially triggering waves of refugees toward Europe. preparing for another counteroffensive or another offensive rather this year, or Ukraine, of course, legitimately striking targets deep inside of Russia, which then the Russian leadership, of course, would also use this as a pretext. So to say that this buying of time is automatic and somehow the war will be frozen within these limits while the West prepares, I don't think anyone can rationalize the situation like this. The sooner this war is over with a victory for Ukraine, the better for NATO. Otherwise, NATO nations can be dragged in into the war if Russia, incidentally or intentionally, attacks Poland, the Baltic states, and others. Probing actions, it could be hybrid actions, cross-border incursions. There are many scenarios that NATO is considering. Actually, there is the largest exercise that's going on since the time of the Cold War, and it actually includes a scenario of Russia attacking the Suwalki Gap between Poland and Lithuania. So the more the war drags on, the worse it is, in the sense that it can create a volatile situation, an unanticipated one in the future. So indeed, yes, NATO has to use the time to prepare, but it shouldn't intentionally. I don't think they're intentionally kind of trying to drag it out so they have time to get ready for potential Russian aggression.
Absolutely. So it was the phraseology of the question that was perverse, not actually necessarily the potential issue that we were addressing. Mark Voyger, thank you so much indeed.